Hello everyone. Today we're working on a 2017 Toyota Sienna XLE. And that's just a normal day in the garage. We're changing the spark plugs and replacing a few gaskets since we'll have to remove a few other bits to get there. The job is meant to be pretty straightforward, but I've already managed to make that a challenge. Although, if I recall correctly, the bolt I dropped from the throttle body was pretty easy to find and pick up with a magnet. Anyways, again, a straightforward job. The intake box needs to come off, which just comes off with a few clips. Next up is the throttle body, which is held in with 4 bolts. Now, be mindful that the throttle body gaskets are usually one-time use, and you should plan to replace this while you're here. Besides, the gasket shouldn't cost you more than a few dollars. With the intake manifold removed and the throttle body loose, we can start to get at the bolts holding the manifold in. The manifold is held in with a total of 6 fasteners, a combination of nuts and bolts. We'll also have to remove any electronic clips and vacuum lines where necessary to get the room that we need. The orange gaskets you're going to see here in a second when we remove the intake manifold will be replaced while I'm here, in addition to the throttle body gasket. So this job was quoted at about $500 at a dealership, and when I heard that, I offered to do the job myself to see what makes this a $500 job. Spark plugs aren't normally expensive, and they're usually pretty easy to change, so what gives? Well, this particular van rocks a 3.5 liter V6 and is shifted 90 degrees, which actually isn't that abnormal, but that means we have 3 spark plugs to the front of the engine bay and 3 spark plugs to the rear. The amount of clearance that I have to do the job in the rear is pretty limited considering we already have to remove the intake manifold in order to get access to the ignition coils and spark plugs. So, I'm assuming the cost comes from the additional labor that's incurred for removing more parts than you might expect to see removed just for a spark plug job. Based on my research prior to tackling this job, most of that labor probably comes from the textbook way of removing the spark plugs, which might entail removing the windshield wipers and the cowl along the top back of the engine bay. The tricky part about this job is shown near the end of this video, where I'm working through the 3 rear spark plugs, so be sure to stick around to see how to save yourself a headache. I love working on newer cars, as you're so much less likely to have to deal with broken clips or seized bolts, hence why I didn't mind taking this job on. So far, all the parts have been coming apart pretty easily, including the sliding of the intake manifold to get access to the 3 rear spark plugs and ignition coils. Since we've got everything out of the way, removal of the ignition coils and spark plugs can commence. The ignition coils needed some encouragement with a flathead screwdriver, but otherwise everything came out pretty smoothly. You'll also notice that the top of this valve cover is pretty dusty. If yours is as dirty, make sure to do the cleaning before you go about removing the ignition coils and spark plugs. You don't want any of that junk making it down to the engine when you pull out the spark plugs, and better safe than sorry. With the top of the valve cover cleaned up, let's get rolling on getting these spark plugs replaced. Generally speaking, I usually take my time from one spark plug to the next. You'll want to check the condition of the spark plugs, as these can usually be telltale signs of any other issues you might be facing with the engine. If at some point you have more than one spark plug well open, don't hesitate to cover the open well with some masking tape. It's cheap insurance, and again, better safe than sorry. Usually on my installations of spark plugs, I'll use a bit of anti-seize on the threads to help the next person tackling the job. In this case, probably me, as this spaceship resides within the family, and I'll be happy to take the job on again. Some dielectric grease along the ceramic parts of the spark plugs and within the spark plug wires will be helpful in promoting a good seal between the spark plug and the wire themselves, if you so please. If you've made it this far, don't give up. You're halfway there. There isn't too much to provide in video here with the limited space that was available, but it's going to be the same process as the front 3 spark plugs, granted with a lot less space. You'll probably have to stretch over the engine bay a good bit to squeeze your hands back there, but the trickiest part will probably be the removal of the electrical connectors if they're in there good and tight. Usually, a good pinch with the assistance of needle nose pliers can be helpful here, along with the flathead again to pry the clip off. For removal and replacement of the spark plugs themselves, feel free to jump to the 9-minute, 20-second mark to see what worked for me. As you can see here, you'll have to get a little creative with what you have. In my case, I had to use a spark plug socket, wobble extension, and a 3-inch extension. That gave me just enough to get into the spark plug well for all 3 rear spark plugs to remove and reinstall the spark plugs. Wish you the best of luck on yours, and if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe.